Thanks, Mark. Everybody been waiting for Gillian to talk about wine. Okay, so how many wine drinkers do we have out there? Raise your hand. Wow, all you guys. How many have been to one of Gary's stores? How many wives see the credit card receipts and say, why are you spending so much wine at Gary's? I have to cut off my wife's access to the credit card access, you know. Okay, so Gillian Sciaretta is going to talk. Has a few things about herself. She's got a few things about Gary. I will say a couple of things. She was the editor of Wine Spectator. Everybody know this? Big time wine magazine. I want to emphasize that I've been shopping at Gary's for a number of years, and he, first of all, is a good corporate citizen. So he has fundraisers. She's going to talk about one. And then when I go into the Madison store, I invariably see people that have been there for the 10 years or more I've been going there. So I'm trying to figure out whether he pays them too much or they don't have anywhere else to go. But that is a good sign that he's got a good business and he's got happy employees. So with that, I'll introduce Gillian Sciaretta.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today. I'm glad that Alan asked you all those questions I was going to ask myself. I'm so happy to see, first of all, so many of you are familiar with Gary's, but more so that even more of you are drinking wine. All right, so let's address the elephant in the room. I know you guys were expecting this guy here. I don't know how many of you have seen the Gary's wine trucks around your neighborhood, but that is my boss on the side of the truck, Mr. Gary Fish. He could not be here today due to, he had an unexpected reason that he had to go to California, and he sends his regards, but hopefully you'll learn just as much, if not more, from me. So, so a little bit more about the company overview, a little bit about us. So you have Gary Fish, founder and CEO there on our left. New Jersey guy, he went to Rider College where he got a degree in political science. His previous career, he was on the wholesale side of things. He was at Fedway, and then he went on to found Gary's Wine and Marketplace in 1987. I am the corporate wine director for Gary's, so I oversee all the purchasing and selling of wine across the entire company. My education, I went to Cornell University where I studied hotel administration. I also received a level 3 certificate from the Wine and Spirits Education Trust. And as Alan mentioned, I was at Wine Spectator, where I was an editor and critic, covering the wines of Spain, Portugal, and Israel. So yeah, going a little bit more about my background. I'm also a New Jersey native. I was born in Bernardsville, New Jersey, where my parents still reside. Which is around 2.5 miles from one of the Gary's stores. So I get to see my parents quite frequently as they're shoppers of Gary's. But I grew up working in hospitality. My father was in the hotel industry, so me and my siblings, as soon as we were old enough to work, we worked in the hotels. So I started off at coat check at 14 years old, then worked my way through several of the departments, front desk, housekeeping, busing, bartending, everything. And that really influenced my decision to go on to study at Cornell at their hotel school. After I graduated, I moved to New York City and started off pretty early on at Wine Spectator. Wine Spectator, which I take it many of you have heard of before. It was a publication that was founded in the late 70s, and then it was a gentleman named Marvin Shankin purchased it and really brought it to what it is today. They're famous for their 100-point wine scores and tasting notes, as well as beautiful articles, profiles. It's a gorgeous magazine, and it's filled with a lot of talented people. So I'm glad to have been there for almost 10 years. And then my husband and I, we met in New York City. We lived in New York City, me for about 15 years, him for about 20. When the pandemic hit, we were one of the many who kind of fled the city, and we decided to go to New Jersey. My husband's a Long Island guy, and so I had to coax him into the mainland, but he's really happy here, I'm happy to say. And I called up Gary because, funny enough, I had interviewed him for an article in 2020, soon after the pandemic hit. And but I called him up about a year later, and I had kind of asked him if he had a job for me, because my background is essentially business, and I wanted to kind of flex those muscles a little bit more. And he was gracious enough to offer me a position as a wine buyer. And then about 8 months ago, I was promoted to wine director for the company. So let's dive a little bit more into Gary's Wine and Marketplace. I mentioned it was founded in 1987 by Gary Fish. And what I love about it is it's a family business. So here, Gary and his son, Mike. Mike is currently the CFO for the company. He's a very talented gentleman. He has also really upped our game when it comes to technology. So he likes to be a little bit more of the behind the scenes guy, which is funny because if you have met Gary, Gary is much in the scene, in front of the scene, but they complement each other quite well. We currently have 4 locations in New Jersey. Hopefully you're familiar with at least one, but there's 4 in total. The original in Madison, and then there's one in Bernardsville. Then we also have Wayne and Closter up in Bergen. A little bit about the timeline. So this is interesting, at least I think it's interesting. So originally founded in 1987 at the original location, which was a small 1,200 square foot location. He moved now on where the location that currently resides on Main Street, which is much bigger. It's 13,000 square feet. In 2001 is when he opened in Bernardsville, New Jersey, about the same size, 13,000 square feet. 2008 opened the 3rd location in Wayne, which is our biggest store square footage wise at 24,000 square feet. We do have 2 big warehouses there, and that's where we do our national shipping out of. So that's where that's really beneficial for the 24,000 square feet. 2017 opened our 4th location in Closter, New Jersey, which is in a really nice high-end shopping center. You have Whole Foods there. That's our smallest store square footage wise at 8,200 square feet. 2018 is when Mike Fish officially joined the business, where we began investing heavily in mobile app and last minute logistics infrastructure, which was quite, the timing was great because just a couple years later when the pandemic hit, that became very crucial for us. And then 2019, we did open a store out in Napa Valley, St. Helena, and that took over a former Dean and DeLuca space. But what's funny when you kind of look a little bit full picture at this is Gary has a knack for opening stores at really bad times. So the early 90s recession with Wayne, the dot-com recession with Bernardsville, the 07-08 Great Recession and with Wayne, and then the 2020 COVID crisis with Napa. Sadly, we did have to close our Napa store last August. We just couldn't really rebound from not just the COVID, but also the fires. There were big time fires that were happening in the West Coast and California, and that devastated the area. I mean, even though tourism was already down because of the pandemic, it was down even further because of the fires and everything that was going on there. And that resulted in also, it was very difficult to find employees as well. So we made the difficult decision to close our Napa store last August. But now we get to see Gary all the time. So good for us. So let's talk a little bit about what we carry and the scale of what we carry. So we carry 4,000 SKUs of wine, so a lot of wine, 1,800 SKUs of spirits, 2,000 SKUs of beer, hard seltzers, and RTDs, or ready-to-drink beverages. So if you kind of find it's a store keeping unit. So it's just each individual product. So yeah, there's 4,000 different products of wine, and for example. And then I was saying RTDs, which is an acronym for ready to drink. So that's become quite popular over the past few years, where people want to pick up a ready to drink cocktail, for example, like Cosmopolitan, gin and tonic, margarita, et cetera, et cetera. We also have a gourmet department with over 200 hand-cut cheeses and meats, and a giftware department. And I have to say the last two are something that really differentiate us, and where Gary was very forward-thinking early on. I think in the 90s, early 90s, he was on a wine trip in Europe. And he just, fell in love with the European local store, where you have, of course, your wine that you can buy, but also beautiful cheeses, meats. And he thought he took that sort of model and brought it back to his stores, and it's kind of grown into something really special at Gary's. It differentiates us. I call Gary's kind of like the candy store for adults, because you go there, you get your wine, you get your cheese, meats, charcuterie board, all this kind of stuff, and it's beautiful, and we have gorgeous displays too. But that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. When you come into Gary's, it's more about an experience. We do in-store tastings and events. Being that we're located close to New York City, which, obviously is a hub for so many things. There's always winemakers and notable industry people who are flying into the New York area, and luckily enough, they contact us and they want to stop by the stores. And so you'll frequently find, a winemaker pouring their wine, for example, or doing an event. We do, dinners, and we'll get into a little bit more about some of the charity events that we do as well. E-commerce is exceptionally important to us. I mean, 80% of our business is done in store, but that 20% of e-commerce is very, very critical, and there's areas of opportunity, so we take it very, very seriously. We have daily email deals on great wines, and that's an important part of my job, is kind of overseeing that. SMS deals that we're starting to do more, so text messaging you, where you can do a reply to buy, so to speak. You see we have a really great offer out on a wine, just reply back to us, let us know how many bottles you want, and that's it. Gift baskets, that's a really important aspect of our business, because as I was saying before, all of those different departments that we have, who doesn't love, a nice, beautiful gift basket with some wine and cheese? And then I mentioned before nationwide shipping. So not only are we an important store in New Jersey, but we really have reach across the entire country. So we're a big player in that circle as well. And knowledgeable team members. something that Gary is always emphasizing and prioritizing is having a great hospitality component at our stores, welcoming staff. We're there to help you and guide you in any decisions that you're looking to make, and also, of course, our website and app. Okay. So my role at Gary's, I am, as I mentioned before, the corporate wine director. So overseeing all the buying and selling, both online and in stores. So this includes not just myself, but there is a total team of 4 wine buyers, as the industry calls us. But funny enough, Gary hates the term wine buyer because he's like, buying is only part of your job. Really, he calls us category managers. So we really, when we make a decision on a wine that we're bringing in, he wants us to have a plan for it and really, own it and, make sure and really see it through, because inventory management, very important part. So I oversee those team members. We have an Italian wine category manager, Cesare Martini. He's mostly based out of our Bernardsville store, but he's from Italy. He has the accent, all the good stuff, but he's very, very knowledgeable when it comes to Italian wine. So he oversees that important category. Yes. Yes, so Cesare Martini, his great-grandfather was the co-founder of Martini and Rossi. So so he could definitely tell you some amazing family stories, and as it relates to that company, which is now owned by Bacardi. It was sold to Bacardi in the early 90s, but he did spend some time working for the company prior to coming over here and working with us. We also have a French wine buyer, Gerard Shirley, and then domestic wine buying, so California, Washington, Oregon, New York, Virginia, all that good stuff. That is kind of done by both Gary and as well as our category manager, Gabby Pinto. So all of us combined, we oversee all those 4,000 SKUs. And are always coming up with, great new discoveries in the world of wine. Me personally, I oversee the categories of Spain, Portugal, Israel, and all Southern Hemisphere. So South Africa, South America, Australia, New Zealand. And I love my categories. They're a little bit of the underdog categories. So, I have to work a little bit harder, but I'm more than up for the challenge. I love teaching people about wine from these regions, both our staff and our guests. So much so that, another important part of my job is travel. Wine is, to me at least, is so much more than just a beverage. It's a gateway to so many other subjects: culture, science, history, and it goes and just tells a story. Wine just kind of can transport you to so many different places. So this past March, I took 3 team members with me on a 9-day trip to Spain. We went through the entire country. We flew directly to Madrid, and then we took a connecting flight down to Malaga, down in Andalusia. We were there for a day or 2, and then we kind of went up to Valencia, then Catalunya, over to Rioja, then more central to Ribera del Duero, and ended up all the way in Galicia on the Atlantic Ocean. So it was, and I told my team members, I'm like, this is not a vacation, like this is a marathon. But they had never been to Spain before. One team member had never been to Europe before. So this was just an eye-opening experience. But we take these experiences with us. We met with winemakers, winery owners, all these different, winery team members to really dive in and understand, what Spain is and what their wines are, and to bring that back to us. So this was obviously, it's a business trip. So what is the result of trips like this are fantastic opportunities, for us to bring in really exceptional wines at all different price points. From this trip, for example, I'm bringing back a wine that costs around $10. Also from this trip, I'm bringing back a wine that costs like well over $100, and a bunch in between. And we're really excited about that. Now we have, 4 team members who can, speak to these wines that much better. And I think that is something, that we pride ourselves with at Gary's. But, last year I got to go to Chile and Argentina. I had never been there before. I'd never been to South America before. So that was really eye-opening. And who knows, next year I'm considering South Africa. And yeah, so that's another important part of my job as well. So I'm just going to touch upon this a little bit because, it's something that we could spend days talking about. And to be honest, going further into this subject of the 3-tier system of alcoholic beverages in the United States, it's a very, very complex subject. But just speaking to, broadly how it works, because it's a system that kind of came about after Prohibition and is a way to kind of, in theory, have certain checks and balances in place between the producer, importer, and all the way through to the retailer. But there's three tiers of how alcohol is sold in the United States. Essentially, the producer / importer. This can be wineries, breweries, distilleries, private label brands, importers. They have to sell through a distributor or a wholesaler, and distributors need to be assigned by states and can only sell to the retailers in their state. And then the third tier is the retailer, which can be both off-premise and on-premise. So on-premise is restaurants. Off-premise is traditional retailers such as Gary's. And then that's where the consumer can purchase the alcoholic beverage. So this is, that's the straightforward way of kind of explaining it, but it varies state to state, and it presents a lot of challenges and also hurdles. But that's kind of like what we're dealing with, where sometimes if you go to Gary's, for example, and you're like, I'm looking for XYZ wine, you had it, like, where is it? What that could mean is several things, but often it can be that our distributor or wholesaler is sold out of it. And that's also an important thing I always like to kind of remind people of with wine is a very finite thing, right? Especially like when you're looking at quality wine where only X number of bottles of a certain wine are produced each year, only so many grapes were grown, and we can sell out. And then in markets like New Jersey, we're next to New York, and New York is a monster. They gobble up a lot of wine. And so us in New Jersey, we kind of have to be like, hey, we're over here. We sell wine too. We're interested in wine too. But, being next to New York, which is a premier market, it has its pros and cons. But this is essentially what we call the 3-tier system, and that's kind of how we work, to get products. And that kind of leads me into my next topic, which is direct, exclusive, and private label wines. So I'm sure when you go to, certain supermarkets or what have you, they'll have, so I have one, oh, do you want me to have so I have the white and the red, but they're the same label essentially. When you go to like a supermarket, how the supermarket can have their private label products. I think it's Walgreens that has, or ShopRite that has Bowl and Basket. Anyway, that is something that we do in the wine industry too, where you have private labels. And about 20% of our business is through our private label products. And so, you know, opposite of private labels are national brands. So national brands, which is a brand that is available to purchase at many retail outlets, you know, really forces retailers to become more competitive on their pricing, which can really drive down margin. So I'm not going to name names, but there's definitely wines that we carry, very well-known wines that we carry, where really we make next to nothing on selling it, like nothing. And in New Jersey, you can't sell below cost, but we have to carry them, you know, because they draw people into the store. There's a demand for them. And it's all good, but you know, we need to make money. You know, we have a lot of paychecks, but so with private label products, these are products that really essentially nobody else carries. So there's no competitive pricing, which can help increase the overall profitability of this category. And one way that, you know, we're very, very proud of our private label products, and that is all because of Gary, to be honest. Gary, he's been in the industry for many decades now, and he has he's developed so many amazing relationships with, you know, industry people, especially winery owners, winemakers, and in particularly out in California. And something interesting about the wine industry is oftentimes at a lot of wineries, they produce extra wine, you know, because they want to control how much of a product, you know, they make of a certain cuvee. And so they have extra wine. And so this presents opportunity where we can go to them being like, well, we own a label, you know, we own the rights to a certain label that we designed and developed, and we would like to, you know, buy that remaining juice and bottle it ourselves and sell it ourselves. And so this wine here, this is the Fish family, as part of our Fish family series. But this is the Fish Sauvignon Blanc. I also have the Fish Cabernet Sauvignon. And this, yeah. So this wine here is some of our top selling private labels. And for this vintage, we have the 2023 vintage for the white and the 2021 vintage for the red. So the friends of Gary who made this for us, they're called Amici Cellars, and they're based out of Napa. They also make wines in Sonoma too. But Tony Biaggi is the winemaker there, and Tony is a rock star winemaker. He was Venice Media's Winemaker of the Year in 2020. He's made 100-point wines before, and some of his wines retail for hundreds of dollars. But we know the Amici company very well. We know Tony really well. So, you know, that's the kind of caliber that we're talking about here. And not that these aren't cheap, but they hit way above their price point. The Cabernet Sauvignon from Sonoma, for example, that's $27.99, and the white wine is, I believe, $24.99. So really what we're able to do is cut out the middleman as much as possible. We still have to get it through a distributor, but for a fraction of what it would be for you know, a national product, and then pass along the savings to our guests. So that's just kind of a glimpse into our private label business, and something that's interesting and becoming more and more important for all retailers. You see Costco does it with their Kirkland Signature, you know, Whole Foods does it, you know, with their wines too. So it's a really fascinating part of the business, and something that's becoming more and more important. So let's talk a little bit about wine scores, which is something I know quite a bit about because I used to give wine scores to wines at my previous employer at Wine Spectator. And a very fair question is always, well, do they matter? And of course, there's no really straight answer to it. It's largely, it depends. So it depends on the critic. Certain publications hold more sway than others. So I can tell you, I can speak of, Wine Spectator, where we do all of our reviewing, or they do all of their reviewing blind, meaning kind of somewhat like the picture where the wines are literally bagged up, and you don't know the price of the wine, you don't know the producer of the wine, you do know the vintage, and you do know where the wine is coming from, because you need a little bit of context. But other publications will do things, for example, in a panel, and then the score will kind of be an average. Some critics do not review blind, and with Spectator's whole thing is that they're trying to make the process as objective as possible. So there's that to consider when looking at a score. It depends on the score too. So these are 100-point scale scores, obviously 100 being, the best of the best. But typically you don't really, the only scores that are really published are 80 points or higher. But it depends on the score. If you're looking at a $10 wine that has an 88-point score, that's really good, in my opinion. But if you're looking at a $200 wine and it has a 88-point score, it's like, okay, well, so you kind of gotta evaluate things. And so it depends on the price too. But my advice though is really read the review, which is the tasting note, because you might be like, oh, well, I only drank 90 or higher, but you read this 87-point score and it's like, well, this checks all the things that I like. So, read the review, and if it's coming from a publication where it's one person reviewing, well, it's one person's opinion. You might differ from it, which is very understandable. And be open-minded and take some risks. For me, wine is all about discovery. And when you're open-minded and you approach, wine and with that kind of mindset, you'll be pleasantly surprised. You're not gonna love everything, and that's okay. But again, it's about trying. It's about using wine as a gateway to discovery and learning. But take some risks too. But at Gary's, we have, I believe, gotten to a point, or I know we have gotten to a point where a lot of our guests know that if we bring in a new wine and we've given it our stamp of approval, then that's good enough, But we will obviously advertise scores as well, and we just kind of do that, to give you more information and to also give you another layer of, assurance that this is a good wine. A little bit about community impact. Alan had mentioned that, Gary is an outstanding, citizen when it comes to helping the community. And it's something that, all of us in the company take part in various activities, charitable activities. Our biggest event being our annual grand tasting, which raises over $50,000 a year, supporting local charities like Morristown Memorial Hospital, the Interfaith Food Pantry, the Morris Arts, and more. In fact, and I went to this gala where Gary and Mike received the Interfaith Food Pantry's Community Impact Award in 2024, and they've donated to the IFP for the past 20 years. I believe the statistic was like our Gary's Wine and Marketplace contributions have yielded over 100,000 meals to the community, which is amazing. We donate over 200 plus non-alcoholic gift baskets annually to local charities to support things like silent auctions. And we donate over $5,000 in annual sponsorships to organizations like the Madison Education Foundations. So definitely look out for our grand annual tasting, which will be happening in the fall of 2024. Exact date is still to be determined, but should be announced soon. This takes place at the Park Avenue Club in Florham Park, New Jersey. And it's a really, really amazing event. We have over 70 tables of different wines and spirits and gourmet items to just taste and enjoy. So wine, beer and spirits, gourmet food. There's also a silent auction. And 100% of the proceeds go to local charities, including the Interfaith Food Pantry, Morris Arts, and nursing education program at Morristown Medical. So that's Gary. He's always wearing his tuxedo. So it's easy to point out at that event. And that's my presentation. So I guess we're going to be opening it up to some Q&A. But
Thanks, Gillian. So if you want to ask a question, come on up. Just a few words about the wine tasting. I've been to them for a couple of years. You saw that little picture of the table? 2 floors. How many square feet? 10, 15,000?
around that, yeah.
So if you're planning on going like I am, and then you can spend 3 to 4 hours there, roughly. So I always Uber.
Yes, very smart.
So it doesn't matter. So, DJ, good. So we're going to open up to questions. We're going to have Al Aho go. Al, how you doing in North Carolina?
I'm doing very well. And this was a very interesting talk. A little while ago, I visited the Biltmore Mansion in Asheville, North Carolina. This is the largest privately owned chateau in the United States. It was built by George Washington Vanderbilt in the late 1800s. And I was surprised that they created a winery on the estate. The estate had initially 125,000 acres, so this was a prime example of conspicuous consumption. My question is, does the name Biltmore Wine have any national presence? I had never heard of it before.
That's a good question. I have heard of the wine that is made at the Biltmore Estate. In my experience, I have never come across it on the market. But a couple interesting things to note is that wine is made in all 50 states. Which, variety of different grape varieties. Some of them are, native varieties. Some are, the classic international varieties like Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc and stuff like that. Yeah, and in some of these instances, those wines from states that aren't, I would say, the traditionally, known winemaking states, you don't really see them outside the state. Oftentimes what they produce, everything is consumed or is sold pretty much on site or very locally. So there's really no need for it to leave the state or head to retailers. Like we're lucky that we're starting to see more wine from, the Finger Lakes up in upstate New York. But even still, the majority of Finger Lakes wine is sold in the Finger Lakes region. It's not really exported so much, so to speak. But I always think it's interesting to kind of go to, to know that there's wine made in all 50 states and seeking them out, because I mean, some are not as delicious as others, but I applaud the passion and the interest, because it's all about the story and the experience and the wine's ability to kind of bring people together, and it's a reflection of the local area. So it's a beautiful thing. But great question, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming today. A great talk and very interesting. I learned a lot, and I think you and your team are doing a fabulous job. I go to Gary's in Madison, and my wife and I love to hang out and do all the tasting at the various stations of wines and cheeses and talk to people and learn things, and everybody's very friendly. So it's just terrific. But I have 2 simple questions for you. One is, of the 4,000 SKUs, how many of them have you tasted? The other question, which is a little bit more substantive, but down in the weeds, could you say a little bit about corks, traditional corks, synthetic corks, and screw tops?
Love those questions. So yes, my team and I, we taste thousands of wines every year. Gary likes to say that we taste all the bad wines so you don't have to. So yeah, almost every day, I'm tasting wine samples and wines that are being presented that want to be sold in Gary's. And we reject a whole lot more than we accept. So I personally, I can't say that, I alone have tasted every single wine that we carry because, again, I've only been at the company for so long. But I can tell you that in order for a wine to have arrived at Gary's, team members had to, or Gary included, have to have, approved the wine and to have brought it in. But yeah, that's a very important part of what we do. Closures. So this is a very interesting subject, I think. Of course, the most traditional wine closure will be obviously your cork. And what is important about traditional cork and why it's used and the effects that it has on the wine is that even though it's mostly airtight, it's mostly airtight. So meaning there is a little bit of oxygen that does get through to the wine. And especially for your higher end reds, wines that you're looking to age for a little bit more or need to age for a little bit more, that can be considered by some to be an important part of the aging process, is having that cork, laying the wine on its side because you don't want the cork to dry out. Then too much oxygen can get in. It can make the cork crumbly as well, but on its side so that the cork stays moist and allowing that little bit of oxygen to get in. I'll move over to screw caps. So when screw caps were first introduced, decades ago, it developed the stereotype of being just for cheap wines, and I can very confidently say that that is definitely not the case anymore. I love screw cap closures. They're so much easier to open. I don't have to worry if I have a wine opener or not. You can also reseal the wine very easily. But the technology behind screw caps has come quite a ways, where there's various different kinds. There's even some screw caps that will even let a little bit of oxygen in. It'll kind of mimic what a cork does. And there are certain countries that are more pro screw cap than cork than others. For example, New Zealand and Australia are very, very, very into screw caps for a few different reasons. It can be that they find that the screw caps are more sustainable. Because the cork has to be harvested from cork trees, and it takes a while, for years, for cork trees to kind of regrow that bark, so to speak, and be used again. Whereas screw caps, that can be made from materials that can be recycled. Also, with kind of going back to corks, there's a risk that comes with traditional corks. And that is something, it's an acronym called TCA, which is a bacteria that starts in the cork and then can travel into the wine. It can spoil the wine. It can have the wine kind of taste like gym socks, like it's disgusting. It's or like dirty leafy earth, just really not, it mutes the fruit flavors, and it just tastes spoiled. And so that is kind of a risk the winemaker will take when using cork. For the very high-end wineries that have really deep pockets, what they can do is they can work with certain cork manufacturers who will individually test every single cork closure for TCA before it goes into the bottling line to ensure that none of their wines will be affected by TCA. But not everyone has that ability. So, there is a low chance outside of that, you can pick up a wine that ends up being corked, and it's very sad. But, it's no fault of the winery, it's no fault of the retailer, but it's just a risk that comes with it. But, we accept cork wines. If you bring it back to us, we will take it and we will refund you, and because then we'll be able to send it back to the wholesaler too. But yeah, and then so screw caps, you have no risk of TCA, obviously. So that's another reason why wineries will opt to do that. But funny enough, years ago when I was at the magazine, I had a meeting with a well-known producer from the Loire Valley, Florent Baumard of Domaine de Baumard, and he makes beautiful white wines out of Chenin Blanc, which is a very aromatic grape variety, and his wines, he makes everything, the whole line from very dry still wines to very beautiful dessert wines. And France, which is, as traditional as it gets, they're very pro-cork there, and especially with, in the Loire Valley, but he kind of made the decision to bottle all of his wines under screw cap. And he felt, because his white wines, they're so aromatic and that's part of their profile, these beautiful aromas, he felt that the screw cap kind of captured and enclosed, these aromas and preserved them much better than a cork could. So what we did was we did a side-by-side vertical tasting of his wines, one bottle with the screw cap and one bottle with the cork enclosure, and saw how the wines aged. And his whole theory was that like I was saying, the screw cap kind of preserved the profile of the vintage for his wines. He felt better, and these are white wines, not red wines. And I could see what he meant by that. I mean, we're talking about, very, we're a critic and a winemaker, discussing differences that most people might not really, well, not that they couldn't pick up on it, but really care. But it was an interesting study and comparison. But that's those two. And then in between that, you have kind of synthetic corks, which are made up of, different materials, plastics, and, and they're kind of molded into the shape of a cork. And that's what's used to bottle, and it's cheaper and more economical. I don't really have much of an opinion. As long as things do their job and they do them well, then that's fine. But I think the big takeaway for me here answering this question is that screw caps are not just for cheap wine, they're for very high wines too. And the technology's come such a long way that, it doesn't say anything about the wine, good or bad, if that helps answer the question. Yeah. Great question. So if you've opened a red wine and you haven't, drunk at all, the best thing to do, definitely recork it and put it in the refrigerator. I think that, depending if it's more of a heavier red wine, like a Cabernet Sauvignon, which has more tannins, which tannins are antioxidants, so it can help preserve it a little bit better. You should be able to enjoy it for, 3 to 4 days, for the most part, but definitely recork it, keep it in the refrigerator. A Pinot Noir, something that's a little bit lighter bodied, probably 2 to 3 days. I mean, it won't be undrinkable after that, but it's just you won't get the same aromatic, vibrant profile as when you first opened it. The best thing to do is if you ever purchase a half bottle of wine, kind of keep that on hand. And if there is enough wine that you haven't finished, funnel it into the smaller bottle and cork it up and put it in the refrigerator, because will be less oxygen remaining in the smaller bottle, and that helps preserve it a little bit better. So pro tip there.
I don't have that problem.
Yeah, just drink it.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. And yeah, I've always looked down on those screw top cork and the wine in a cardboard box. But now I'm going to try those screw top. I have a question regarding the futures. I used to buy my wine in futures, and I don't do that anymore because I'm getting older and I can't wait for the wine. But what is the state of futures? It seems like it's losing track, and why? Thank you.
So the question was regarding wine futures. So this you see a lot of times out of, mostly it's probably most well known with the wines of Bordeaux out of France, that are obviously, you know, that's a region, it's a trophy region. It's known for producing highly collectible wines. And what will happen is that they will sell the wine on future, thinking that you'll get a better price, paying for the wine a couple of years early. And then once it's released to the market, the price will go up. And that's something that we definitely participate in. We do, we still do Bordeaux futures business. But yeah, it has kind of slowed down. I think, you know, it's a tricky thing because wine is a product of nature, and it's dependent, and each growing season is different. And in an area like Bordeaux, which is a maritime climate, they've been having some challenging vintages. Whether it's you know, hail, or severe heat waves, or mildew, or things like that, you know, so it becomes challenging to kind of, you know, sell these wines year after year on future, because people will be like, oh, I want the best vintage or the best vintage. And so it's a tricky thing. I think that it'll still be around. There's still a future for it, but it will become more selective. You know, I think that looking for us at Gary's, we're still going to continue participating in futures, but we're going to be more selective with the wines that we offer. And because what we've seen is that sometimes, you know, what can happen is that when the wines do hit the market, like the price hasn't really changed a whole lot. So it's a tricky thing, but it's definitely still worthwhile for the very collectible chateau. And I guess that's the best way for me to answer, is that we're just going to be, you know, more selective with what chateaus we participate with in offering futures. Yes. Oh, yeah. So how do we sell futures? It's trying to think of like examples. Like typically it varies. You know, we offer them on pre-arrival, right? So it's like you'll buy the wine and then you won't see it for a couple, 2 to 3 years, because it's still the wine is still aging at the chateau. Oftentimes reviews that you see on critic reviews that you find on futures are done at a barrel samples. So all the critics kind of go to Bordeaux and they visit the various chateaux, or they go to all these tastings and they taste barrel samples, and they're kind of, you know, this is where experience plays like a really important key when it comes to the critic reviews, and kind of understanding the vintage and understanding how that vintage will affect that certain wine down the road. But it's very interesting, and it's something that is still an important part of what we do, for sure.
Thank you. This is so interesting. I have a technical question. Everybody knows that you don't leave a bottle of wine in the sun or in your hot car and so forth. So, but nevertheless, wine sits in your store and it gets delivered. So do you take special precautions when you deliver wine, or only the most expensive wines, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely wine is delicate to a degree. You know, we are lucky that at Gary's we tend to go through inventory pretty quickly. So you know, we don't like things sitting around for too long of a time. But as it relates to getting the wine to you, with our local delivery, we make sure our trucks are air conditioned and nothing's sitting around. You know, with shipping, oftentimes we will, you know, especially for customers, if we're shipping to an even like hotter state, we will delay shipment until temperatures have cooled down a little bit. Because you never know where a box is going to remain sitting, you know, for too long. But we also have cool packaging, you know, so it's you know, we have like cold packs that we can add to shipments as well. But in terms of what we have on our shelves, I mean, like I said, we move through things at a clip. We make sure that, you know, that inventory is not sitting around too long. We've never really, at least I haven't really heard of, you know, wines I taste, because I buy from Gary's all the time. It's always been good. But yeah, it gets tricky. You know, sometimes when you hear of all these like crazy situations, when I talk to, you know, my peers at like who work for importers, you know, what kind of keeps them up at night is that if they're bringing over, you know, wines from Europe, there'll inevitably be a strike by the dock workers or something, and their container will be sitting out in the July heat in Italy somewhere, and they'll be, you know, really, really concerned about what's going on there. But you know, wine has definitely, a lot of wine has gotten to a point where it's more stable than it used to be in a lot of instances. So it's for us not too much of an issue. Yeah.
I thought all wine that comes overseas that's put in a container is put in a refrigerated or a cooled container. That was discovered in the 70s by a guy, so.
Yes, yeah, Jorge Ordonez, yeah. No, for sure, but like it's sometimes these strikes can happen and they aren't sure if their wine has made it to the container yet. You know, it's like, where is the wine sitting? You know, there's a point where you hand it off to the transporters and you don't know where exactly the wine is. Do they care? You know, and where it's ended up. But yeah, there's a lot of the containers are refrigerated. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Gillian, for a great presentation. I think I learned more about wine today than I ever knew. I started out having two questions, actually. I now have a third as a result of follow-up to this last comment, which is, are you allowed to ship wine or other alcoholic beverages outside of New Jersey?
Yes. So we do ship outside of New Jersey. Our Wayne store, you have to have different licensing to ship to different states. So out of our Wayne store, for example, we're able to ship to about 35 different states. All of our stores can ship within New Jersey. And then randomly, our Bernardsville store can ship to Florida, Virginia, and DC. So.
A couple of other questions. We spend some time, usually every summer, out in the Hamptons, where there are a great many wineries, particularly on the North Fork of Long Island. And I was wondering if you carry any of those brands and how you feel about them. The other question is that I've noticed that, I guess that's about all wine is sold in glass bottles, whereas hard liquor is frequently sold in plastic bottles. I'm wondering why the difference.
Okay, so Long Island wines. Yeah, we definitely sell a few different wines out of Long Island. I would say our most successful or most popular will be the Wolfer, which they're famous for their summer in a bottle rosé. We also have the white wine too. I think I've been out to the North Fork and other parts of all the way out there, out east, in the wine regions, and it's so much fun. I think that going to the winery visits, it's a great way to get out. So it's done an amazing thing out there locally for the the hospitality scene, and looking at wine, like even in America as a total, we're still in our infancy when it comes to wine and producing wine relative to Italy and France and Greece and what have you. So it's exciting times for us to kind of see we're still kind of in an age of discovery. So I think, speaking of Long Island, they've come quite a long ways. And I think the future is bright for them too. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we need to pick it up because we've got a queue of questions. You're very popular, Gillian. Brief questions, brief answers.
You carry, okay, tailor your mix to the location of the stores, let's say, different products in, let's say, Wayne, Madison, or?
Sure. So I guess the question is, do we carry different products at different stores?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a great question. We definitely do. We know that, for example, generally speaking, Sauvignon Blanc is a little bit more popular at Bernardsville than it is at Madison. Still very popular at Madison, but for some reason, Bernardsville just kind of has a little bit more. When it comes to stuff like, to kosher wines, for example, Closter definitely by far sells the more kosher wines, so we have more SKUs of kosher wines up there. And then, there's definitely a lot, like our Wayne store, they have a local Armenian population there, so we carry some wines from Armenia as well. So we definitely tailor it if we see that there's a trend happening in one store area and differentiate it from the others.
Online, Phil?
Online?
Yes, thanks very much for your presentation. I enjoyed all the information you provided. Two quick questions. One would be the benefit of a vacuum sealed closure for holding wine at home. We have one, seem to use it on the red wines that to keep around for a few days, and it seems to work well. It holds vacuum for several days. And then, is that worth it? And the second is a larger one. Have you had any feedback from the industry on the effect of the wildfire smoke on various vineyards? I read something a year or so ago that there was going to be some effect, and they were monitoring that. Thank you.
So vacuum closures, I personally have never used it, but I've only heard good things. Again, as much as you can do to kind of take oxygen out of the equation to keep your wine fresh, the more chances you are of preserving your wine for a little bit longer. Wildfires, yeah. So in 2020, out in Northern California, the wildfires were so bad that in a lot of instances, a lot of producers opted to or were not able to make any wine because the smoke, a lot of the grapes had not been harvested yet. So the smoke kind of came into their vineyards and attached itself to the grapes, and you just can't really get rid of it. And it just, if you try some of like a wine that was affected by smoke taint, it just kind of tastes ashy and smoky and just, not what it should be. And it's really sad. But there definitely are successful bottlings from the 2020 vintage in California. We definitely had to go through a lot of tastings to kind of find them. But it was really sad. It was just very, very sad times. And yeah, but something that you're kind of seeing happen more and more out there.
Unfortunately, I had stopped drinking wine a while ago because I was getting allergic reactions. My face was itchy and whatnot, especially American wines. But my wife liked this particular wine called Vieille Ferme, which I can't I don't drink any wine I can pronounce. Now, you're one of the 2 stores in a large area that carries it. And we like it so much that I became familiar with your stocking schedule. You stock the shelves on Tuesdays, and if you go on Thursdays, you're out. And I've tried to tell the people to bring more. But anyway, it doesn't, I'm not as allergic to my reaction to that. The other thing is last year I went to South Africa and I discovered that there are other wines in South Africa, Mbali and Delicious Monster, carried by one of your competitors. I won't say the name, Trader Joe's. But anyway, very, very reasonably priced table wines that also don't give me an allergic reaction. Do you have any insight on that, and what do you suggest? And also, get more of this stuff, especially New Providence store, okay?
Yeah, I think that I mean, I'm not a doctor, so do not take any medical advice from me. Yeah, I think that people can be sensitive to a lot of different things when it comes to wine. A question I'm often asked is about sulfites. And, you know, they're looking for sulfite-free wine. I'm sorry to say that there's no such thing as a sulfite-free wine. It's a naturally occurring thing that you just can't get rid of. But some producers will add some at the end of the winemaking process so that it makes the wine more stabilized for transportation and to be, you know, stable on the shelf. Some add very, very little. Actually, there's probably more sulfites in French fries than there are in wine. So if you're getting the same reaction from French fries, I don't know. But yeah, I think, you know, different grape varieties, you know, people can react differently to that. Alcohol levels, you know, there's a lot of different components, but I'm glad that you're able to at least isolate out the ones that make you feel good, so.
Are there any changes coming in the regulatory area? I had the impression that the wine distributors, through their lobbying, established early protections to the distributors that may have been disadvantageous to retailers or to the consumer. Wonder if that is a fair reflection on things and whether there's any likelihood that there will be changes.
Welcome to New Jersey.
Yeah, there's always a lot going on, and you know, I'm not on the wholesale side of things, so I can't necessarily speak to it firsthand. But I can tell you, like, as a retailer, you know, what we are seeing, and you see this with other things too, is a lot of the smaller wholesalers are kind of going away, and they're, you know, losing out to the big guys, the big competition, and that's sad because, you know, that limits the number of products that we're able to have access to. So, you know, that's definitely a trend that we're seeing as a result of that. But
Very good, Gillian. Summit used to be the capital of orchid growing in the United States. And as I tell these guys, and you can hear it too, is the only thing they're growing in Summit these days are trust funds. So this is a certificate. Oh, it's up on the board. And you get an orchid, an actual orchid. And then we also give an old guard salute.
oh. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.